My name is Haley Thompson, and at 27, I never imagined I'd be racing through the worst blizzard in decades to find my estranged mother. 3 years of silence shattered by one disjointed voicemail. The highway disappeared under sheets of white as my windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the snow. When I finally found her, huddled against the brick wall of that abandoned gas station, her lips blue and fingers stiff, I realized some journeys change you forever. If you're watching this from somewhere warm, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're from in the comments. This story might just change how you think about family. My life in Chicago had been carefully constructed, a world away from my tumultuous childhood. The marketing firm I worked for had just promoted me to senior manager, and my apartment overlooking Lake Michigan was everything I dreamed of while growing up in our cramped two-bedroom rental. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd built a career helping brands tell their stories while I actively avoided my own. It wasn't always bad with Mom. When I was little, Diane Thompson was the mother who made Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes on Saturday mornings and crafted elaborate Halloween costumes from scratch. She read to me every night, doing all the character voices that made me giggle until my sides hurt. I still remember her warm hands brushing hair from my forehead when I had fevers, how she'd sing softly until I fell asleep. The good memories make what came after harder to reconcile. The changes were subtle at first: missed parent-teacher conferences, forgotten permission slips, the growing collection of empty wine bottles in the recycling bin. By the time I turned 13, Mom had lost her job at the bank, and our electricity got shut off 3 times that winter. "It's just temporary, Haley girl," she'd say, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We're survivors, you and me." And we were, but the cost was high. I became the adult in our relationship far too young. I learned to forge her signature on school forms, cook basic meals, and hide my lunch money so it wouldn't disappear from my backpack overnight. I made excuses for her when she missed my high school graduation because she was sick. I pretended not to know she'd pawned the laptop my dad had sent me for my birthday. Dad wasn't much help from his new life in California with his new wife and their twins. The child support checks came regularly, but he'd mentally checked out years before the divorce. Our monthly phone calls grew shorter until they became perfunctory birthday and Christmas exchanges. My freshman year of college was a revelation. For the first time, I experienced what normal felt like: consistent meals, uninterrupted electricity, and the luxury of focusing on my own problems. I'd won a scholarship that covered most of my expenses, and I worked 2 part-time jobs to manage the rest. I came home less and less, making excuses about study groups and campus activities. Mom's addiction worsened in my absence. Pills joined the alcohol, prescribed initially for a back injury after a minor car accident, then acquired through increasingly questionable means. When I did visit, I'd find her either manic and talkative or passed out on the couch. The house fell into disrepair around her. The final straw came 3 years ago, right after my 24th birthday. I'd just started dating Jason, a kind, steady graphic designer who worked on my floor. After months of excuses, I finally agreed to introduce him to my mother. I spent days cleaning her house, stocking her fridge, begging her to make a good impression. She seemed sober when we arrived, but halfway through dinner, she started slurring her words. By dessert, she was making inappropriate comments about Jason's pretty boy face and asking if he was good enough for her daughter. When I tried to get her to stop, she knocked over her wine glass, shattering it against the wall. "You think you're so perfect now," she spat as I cleaned up the mess. "Got your fancy job and fancy boyfriend. You're ashamed of me. Mom, you're drunk. Let's talk tomorrow when you're sober. Don't condescend to me, Haley Elizabeth. I sacrificed everything for you." The argument escalated until she said the unforgivable: "You know what? You're just like your father. Selfish. The minute things get hard, you bail." Something in me snapped. "I never bailed. I was a child. I emptied your vomit buckets. I paid our electric bill with my babysitting money. I wrote your checks when your hands shook too badly to hold a pen. I was never allowed to be a child because you couldn't be an adult." Jason pulled me away as tears streamed down my face. Mom stood in the doorway as we left, shouting that she never asked for any of my help, that I made her feel like a charity case. "Don't bother coming back," were her final words. And I didn't. For 3 long years. I tried to convince myself it was better this way. My therapist called it a necessary boundary. My friends supported my decision to go no contact. Only a small, persistent voice in my head questioned whether I'd given up too easily. I changed my phone number a year after our fight, when her midnight calls became too frequent and too incoherent. I still sent birthday and Christmas cards to her address, but never included a return address or phone number. I asked our old neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, to check on her occasionally and let me know if anything drastic happened. Life moved forward. Jason and I moved in together. My career flourished. I adopted a cat named Fitzgerald and joined a book club. I was building a life that made sense. Then, last Tuesday, I received a voicemail from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. "Haley? Haley girl, is that you?" My mother's voice, thin and confused. "I don't know where I am. Everything looks different in the snow. My car stopped working. I think I was trying to find you. I'm sorry. I need help. I'm so cold." The message ended abruptly. I tried calling back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I called Mrs. Abernathy, who informed me that she hadn't seen my mother in nearly 2 weeks. The apartment manager reported that Diane had moved out a month ago, leaving no forwarding address. I tracked the number to a cell tower near Millridge, a small town almost 200 miles north of Chicago. A massive winter storm was barreling toward the Midwest, expected to drop over 2 feet of snow overnight. "You can't seriously be thinking of driving up there," Jason said as he watched me throw warm clothes into a duffel bag. "The highways will be closed by midnight. It's too dangerous." "She's my mother, Jason." She sounded disoriented. "What if she's hurt?" "Then call the police in Millridge. Have them look for her." "And tell them what?" "That my elderly-sounding mother might be somewhere in their town? They'll put it at the bottom of their priority list." "She's not elderly, Haley. She's 51. And you haven't spoken to her in 3 years because she was abusive." His words stung because they were true. But the fear in my mother's voice haunted me. "I know it's complicated. But if something happens to her and I did nothing, I couldn't live with myself." Jason sighed, recognizing the determination in my eyes. "At least take my SUV instead of your sedan. It has 4-wheel drive. And promise you'll turn around if the weather gets too bad." I agreed, though we both knew I was lying about the second part. Once I set my mind to something, I rarely backed down. It was a trait I'd inherited from my mother, ironically enough. As I packed emergency supplies, blankets, protein bars, a first aid kit, road flares, I wondered what I would say when I found her. If I found her. I rehearsed stern speeches about responsibility and boundaries. But beneath my anger and resentment lay a current of worry I couldn't ignore. Why had she been trying to find me? What had happened to make her leave her apartment? And why did she sound so confused? With the storm rapidly approaching and my determination set, I kissed Jason goodbye, promised to check in hourly, and headed north into the gathering darkness. The drive started innocuously enough. Chicago's skyline receded in my rearview mirror as light flurries danced in the headlights. The weather report on the radio warned of deteriorating conditions, but the interstate remained clear for the first hour. I kept the heat blasting and wrapped myself in the confidence that I'd reach Millridge before the worst hit. My phone rang through the car speakers. Megan, my best friend since college, her voice tight with concern. "Please tell me Jason is joking about you driving to Wisconsin in a blizzard." "It's not a blizzard yet," I countered, changing lanes to pass a slow-moving truck. "And I have to find her, Meg. The same woman who told you never to come back? The one who made your childhood a living hell? That woman." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "She's still my mother. She's an adult who made her choices, Haley. You don't owe her a rescue mission. You don't understand. I understand that you've spent your whole life trying to save her, and all it's brought you is pain." Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. "This is different." She sounded scared, confused. "What if she's having a medical emergency?" Megan's sigh crackled through the speakers. Just promise me you won't let her manipulate you again. You've worked too hard to build your life. I'm just going to make sure she's safe. That's it. After hanging up, I questioned my own motivations. Was I driving into a potentially life-threatening storm out of love or guilt? The lines had always blurred when it came to my mother. 2 hours into the journey, the weather turned. What started as gentle snowflakes transformed into driving sheets of white. The wind picked up, howling around the SUV and pushing against its sides. Visibility dropped to less than a quarter mile. I stopped at a roadside diner called Ruby's just as darkness fell completely. The parking lot was crowded with travelers seeking refuge from the storm. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee provided momentary comfort. "Where you headed, honey?" asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with a name tag reading Doris. "Millridge," I replied, warming my hands around a mug of hot chocolate. She frowned, pouring coffee for the trucker at the next stool. "Not tonight, you aren't. They've already closed Route 12 leading into town. Drifts too high." My heart sank. There has to be another way. The trucker turned toward me, his beard frosted with melting snow. "There's County Road 8. It's longer, winds through the hills, but the trees provide some shelter from drifting. I'm Martin, by the way." "Haley. And thank you." I pulled out my phone to look at the map. "It's not an easy drive on a good day," Martin warned. "Narrow, lots of curves. In this weather? You'd need to be real careful." "I have to try. My mother's up there somewhere, and she needs help." Something in my voice must have conveyed my determination because Martin nodded solemnly. "Follow me out to my rig. I've got a paper map that'll show you the back routes. Cell service gets spotty once you're in the hills." The diner windows rattled as another gust of wind hit. Several patrons looked up nervously. Doris shook her head as she refilled my cocoa. "Whatever's pulling you to Millridge must be mighty important. Most folks with good sense are looking for a motel right about now." "It is important," I said simply. Armed with Martin's map and directions, I set out again. The SUV handled the increasingly treacherous roads better than my sedan would have, but the going was painfully slow. What should have been a 4-hour journey was stretching into the night with no end in sight. County Road 8 proved as challenging as Martin had warned. The narrow 2-lane road twisted through dense forest, the trees creating a tunnel that kept some snow at bay but turned the drive into a claustrophobic experience. My high beams reflected off the falling snow, creating a disorienting effect. I leaned forward in my seat, straining to see the road ahead. 3 hours later, disaster struck. Coming around a sharp curve, my headlights illuminated a fallen branch in the road too late for me to stop. I swerved, overcorrected, and felt the sickening sensation of the SUV sliding sideways. The world spun in slow motion as I slid off the road and into a snowbank with a muffled crunch. The engine stalled. My hands trembled as I tried to restart it. "Nothing." "No, no, no," I muttered, trying again. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I sat back, forcing myself to breathe deeply. Panic wouldn't help. I checked my phone, no service, as Martin had predicted. The clock read 11:42 p.m. Outside, the temperature was dropping rapidly. I had emergency supplies, but the thought of spending the night stranded in the woods sent fear coursing through me. I tried the engine one more time, and miraculously, it caught. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The SUV wouldn't move, its wheels spinning uselessly in the deep snow. I was contemplating whether to stay put or try walking to find help when headlights appeared around the curve. A pickup truck slowed, and a man in his 40s stepped out, approaching cautiously. "You all right in there?" he called. I rolled down my window. I slid off the road. "Can't get traction." "I've got a tow strap. Let me help you out." The man, who introduced himself as Paul, worked methodically in the bitter cold, attaching the strap to my SUV and using his truck to pull me back onto the road. His kindness caught me off guard, a stranger stopping in a blizzard to help without hesitation. "Where you headed?" he asked as he packed away his equipment. "Millridge. My mother's there. She's in trouble." Paul nodded, his expression serious. "Follow me for the next 20 miles. I'm turning off at Lakeside, but I'll get you through the worst stretch." I followed Paul's taillights like a lifeline, the red glow guiding me through the worsening storm. When he turned off with a honk and a wave, I felt a renewed determination. The kindness of strangers was carrying me forward. By the time I reached the outskirts of Milridge County, it was past 1 a.m. Exhaustion pulled at me, but I couldn't stop now. I needed to find a place to stay, recharge my nearly dead phone, and formulate a plan to find my mother in the morning. Every motel I passed displayed "No vacancy" signs, their parking lots filled with vehicles of stranded travelers. Finally, at a small roadside inn, the night manager took pity on me. "I don't have any rooms," he said, "but you can sleep in the lobby if you're desperate. Better than your car in this cold." I accepted gratefully, curling up on a vinyl sofa in the corner of the brightly lit lobby. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, my mother's confused voice echoed in my mind, along with a gnawing question: what would I find when morning came? Dawn broke with no reprieve from the storm. Through the motel lobby windows, I watched an apocalyptic scene unfold: snow swirling in vicious eddies, cars completely buried, road signs barely visible above massive drifts. The weather report on the lobby television used phrases like "historic blizzard" and "state of emergency." "Roads are closed in and out of town," the night manager informed me as he handed me a styrofoam cup of coffee. "State patrols pulling people out of ditches all over the county." I thanked him for the coffee and the shelter, then retreated to a corner to charge my phone and plan my next move. Jason had left several panicked messages once I'd lost service. I called him immediately. "Thank God," he answered. "I was about to call the state police." "I'm in Milridge County, but not the town yet," I explained, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The main roads are closed. They're saying it's the worst storm in 30 years. Please tell me you're not going back out in it." "I made it this far," I said, watching the snow pile against the doors. "I can't give up now." After reassuring Jason I would be careful, I pulled up the map of Milridge. The town proper was still 15 miles away. If my mother had called from there, that's where I needed to go. As I prepared to leave, the memory of our last fight flashed in my mind: her flushed face, her cruel words, my own angry tears. 3 years of silence stretched between that moment and now. What right did I have to burst back into her life? What right did she have to call me for help after everything? I pushed the thoughts away. Right or wrong, I was here now. The SUV started reluctantly in the bitter cold. The parking lot had been partially plowed, but beyond it, the roads were treacherous. I inched forward, following the barely visible tracks of a snowplow that must have passed earlier. Local radio reported multiple road closures, but mentioned that Route 16 into Milridge remained passable, for emergency vehicles only. I wasn't emergency services, but my situation felt like an emergency to me. The 15-mile journey took over 2 hours of white-knuckle driving. Twice I had to detour around fallen trees. Once I nearly slid into a ditch while avoiding an abandoned car. By the time I reached the "Welcome to Milridge" sign, my shoulders ached from tension, and my eyes burned from straining to see through the relentless snow. Milridge was a small town of perhaps 5,000 people, with a main street lined with brick buildings that might have been charming under different circumstances. Today, it was a ghost town. Snow piled in drifts against storefronts, and the few people brave enough to venture out hurried along with heads bowed against the wind. I parked outside a cafe that showed signs of life: lights on, smoke from the chimney. Inside, a handful of locals huddled over coffee cups. The young waitress looked surprised to see a new face. "You must be crazy or desperate to be driving today," she remarked as she poured me coffee. "Maybe both," I admitted. "I'm looking for my mother. She called me from somewhere around here yesterday. Her name is Diane Thompson." The waitress shook her head. "Don't know her, sorry. But if she's stranded, you might check with Sheriff Cooper. His office is dealing with all the emergency calls." My phone battery was dwindling again despite the brief charge. I tried calling my mother's number, but it went straight to voicemail. As I scrolled through my contacts, searching for anyone who might know where she'd been headed, the screen went black. Dead battery, despite the earlier charge. "Do you have a phone charger I could use?" I asked the waitress. "Sorry, honey. Power's been flickering all morning. Wouldn't trust it with your phone. With no other options, I headed to the sheriff's office 2 blocks down. The walk, though short, was punishing. The wind cut through my coat, and snow found its way into my boots and down my collar. Sheriff Cooper was a burly man with a salt-and-pepper mustache and tired eyes. His office was crowded with people reporting emergencies, a collapsed barn roof, an elderly couple without heat, a diabetic running low on insulin. When I finally got his attention and explained my situation, he sighed heavily. "We've got 24 stranded motorists across the county, ma'am." Without more information then, she called from somewhere around here. "There's not much I can do." "Please," I pressed. "Her name is Diane Thompson. She's 51, about 5'6", brown hair with some gray. She might seem confused or disoriented." Something flickered in his eyes. "Thompson, you said? We did find an abandoned vehicle yesterday registered to a Diane Thompson. Blue Honda Civic, Illinois plates." My heart leaped. "That's her." "Where?" "Out by Jensen's gas station, about 7 miles west of town. Car was out of gas, no one inside. We figured they'd hitched a ride somewhere." "Or she started walking and got lost," I said, fear clutching at my throat. "I need to get out there." The sheriff shook his head firmly. "No one's going anywhere until this storm breaks. I can't spare the manpower to look for someone who's probably found shelter already." "Then I'll go myself." "That would be extremely unwise, Miss Thompson. The road to Jensen's isn't plowed and temperatures are dropping. You'd be putting yourself at risk." I understood his position, but standing still wasn't an option. My mother had been missing for at least 24 hours in freezing temperatures. If she was confused, as her voicemail suggested, she might not have sought proper shelter. I thanked the sheriff and left, already formulating a plan. I had about a quarter tank of gas left, enough to get to Jensen's if I was careful. The SUV's 4-wheel drive had gotten me this far. It would have to get me a little farther. As I drove west out of town, following the sheriff's directions, the storm intensified. Snow flew horizontally across the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The road became narrower, winding through dense forest. 6 miles out of town, disaster struck again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The gas gauge, which had shown a quarter tank, now pointed at empty. The bitter cold must have affected the sensor's accuracy. I was stranded, miles from town, with a dead phone and dwindling daylight. The temperature gauge on the dashboard showed 17 degrees Fahrenheit, and falling. For the first time since I'd received my mother's voicemail, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of fear. Not just for her, but for myself. No one knew exactly where I was. The storm showed no signs of abating. I had walked into a potentially fatal situation. Looking around the SUV, I took inventory of my supplies. 1 blanket, half a bottle of water, 2 protein bars, and a road flare. Not enough for a prolonged stay in sub-zero temperatures. The gas station couldn't be more than a mile away. Walking there in these conditions would be dangerous, but staying put might be worse. I layered on every piece of clothing I had, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Snow immediately worked its way into my clothes despite my layers. Keeping the road under my feet required constant vigilance. One wrong step, and I'd be waist-deep in a drift. I trudged forward, head down against the wind, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other. The world narrowed to this single task: keep moving. Time became meaningless as numbness spread from my toes to my feet, from my fingers to my hands. Just as despair began to set in, a shape loomed ahead through the curtain of snow. The flat roof of a small building, a tall sign now dark, Jensen's gas station. Hope gave me a final burst of energy. I pushed forward, squinting through the swirling snow. As I drew closer, I made out the outline of the building, a single-story structure with 2 gas pumps out front, all covered in snow. Then I saw it. A figure huddled against the brick wall beside the entrance. A person curled into themselves, barely distinguishable from the snowdrift forming around them. I ran the last few yards, my heart pounding with fear and recognition. "Mom?" I called, my voice thin in the howling wind. The figure didn't move. I dropped to my knees beside her. It was my mother, her face pale blue with cold, her eyes closed. She wore only a light jacket, jeans, and sneakers, nowhere near enough protection from the elements. Snow covered her like a blanket. Mom, Diane. I shook her shoulder, panic rising in my throat. Her eyelids fluttered. Cold, she murmured. So cold. Relief flooded through me. She was alive. But for how long? We were both stranded in a lethal storm, miles from help, with no way to call for assistance. As I pulled her closer, trying to share what little warmth I had left, I realized the gas station door was only a few feet away. If we could get inside, we might survive. With renewed determination, I struggled to my feet and dragged my mother toward the entrance, praying it would open. The gas station door was locked, of course. I pounded on it frantically, hoping against hope that someone might be inside, but the building stood dark and silent. The windows were too high to break easily, and even if I could, the alarm might alert someone to our presence, if it worked at all in the storm. My mother stirred weakly in my arms. Haley? Is that really you? Yes, Mom, it's me. I pulled her closer, trying to shield her from the worst of the wind. We need to find shelter. Can you walk? She nodded vaguely, but when I tried to help her stand, her legs buckled. Hypothermia had clearly set in. I remembered reading somewhere that confusion and weakness were dangerous signs. Around the side of the building, I spotted a maintenance shed. It wasn't ideal, but it might block the wind. Half carrying, half dragging my mother, I made my way toward it. The door was secured with a simple padlock that, in my desperation, I managed to break using a rock and sheer adrenaline. Inside, the shed was cramped but blessedly windproof. Tools hung on the walls, and a stack of empty plastic containers filled one corner. It wasn't warm, but without the wind chill, it felt significantly better than outside. I helped my mother sit against the wall, then wrapped my blanket around her. Her clothes were soaked through from the snow, which made her condition even more dangerous. Hypothermia 101. Get out of wet clothes. But I had nothing dry to offer her except my own layers, which were also damp from my trek. We need to get you warm, I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice. Mom, how long have you been out there? She looked at me with confusion. Haley girl? You came. Her words slurred slightly, another bad sign. Yes, I came. I got your message. I rubbed her hands between mine, trying to restore circulation. What happened? Why are you here? I was coming to see you, she said, her gaze drifting. I needed to tell you important things. In a blizzard? Mom, I stopped myself. Recriminations wouldn't help now. Never mind. Just stay with me, okay? Stay awake. I searched the shed for anything useful. A shelf held some rags, a flashlight with dead batteries, and miraculously a tarp. It wasn't a blanket, but it was dry and could add another layer of insulation. As I worked to create a makeshift shelter within the shed, arranging the tarp over and around us, memories flooded back. A camping trip when I was 9, my mother showing me how to build a lean-to in case we got separated from our group. Always be prepared, she'd said, her hands confident as they lashed branches together. Nature doesn't care if you're scared or tired. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, using her lessons to save her life. Do you remember teaching me about wilderness survival? I asked, trying to keep her engaged. That camping trip to Lake Geneva? A faint smile touched her blue-tinged lips. You were so mad, had to leave your video games behind. But I caught my first fish, I continued, tucking the tarp around her legs. You showed me how to clean it, cook it over the fire. You were a natural, she murmured. Always so capable. I had to keep her talking, keep her conscious. Mom, why were you trying to find me? What happened to your apartment? She was quiet for so long I thought she might have drifted off, a dangerous prospect. Then she spoke, her voice clearer than before. I got sick, Haley. Really sick. My hands stilled. What do you mean? What kind of sick? Started forgetting things. Little things at first, where I put my keys, appointments. Then bigger things. Got lost coming home from the grocery store I'd been going to for years. She closed her eyes briefly. Doctors ran tests. Said, early onset dementia. Maybe Alzheimer's. They're not sure yet. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Dementia? My mother was only 51. Why didn't you call me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me? You were so angry, she whispered. Had every right to be. And I was ashamed. Didn't want you to see me like this. A tear slid down her cheek. But it got worse. Started forgetting to pay bills. Got evicted. My heart constricted painfully. While I'd been building my perfect Chicago life, my mother had been facing this alone. Where have you been living? Motel for a while. Then my friend Susan's couch. But I got confused there too. Set off her smoke alarm trying to make tea at 3 in the morning. She suggested I find family who could help. Mom's eyes focused on me with sudden clarity. You're all I have, Haley. The brutal honesty of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, the neglect, the addiction, the fights, she was all I had too, in terms of blood family. So you decided to drive to Chicago? In winter. She nodded weakly. Wasn't snowing when I left. Just wanted to see you explain. Then got confused, turned north instead of south. By the time I realized, the storm hit. Car ran out of gas. Tried to call you. The pieces fell into place. Her disoriented voicemail, the abandoned car, her inappropriate clothing for the weather, all symptoms of a mind beginning to fail her. I thought of all the times she'd failed me growing up, the neglect, the emotional manipulation, the chaos. I'd attributed it all to selfishness and addiction. Had some of it been early symptoms we'd both missed? Or was I making excuses for her again? It didn't matter now. What mattered was that we were both in danger, and I needed to get us out alive. We're going to be okay, I said, with more confidence than I felt. But we need to share body heat. Survival basics, right? I moved beside her, wrapping my arms around her thin frame. She felt fragile, much smaller than I remembered. When had she lost so much weight? I'm so sorry, Haley, she whispered against my shoulder. For everything. You deserved better. In all our years of conflict, through all the broken promises and disappointments, she had never offered such a direct apology. The simplicity of it, here in this freezing shed while we fought for survival, broke something open inside me. I'm sorry too, I said, my voice thick. For cutting you off. For not being there when you got sick. No. Her voice grew stronger, more insistent. Don't you dare apologize. You did what you had to do. I was toxic, Haley. I know that now. We sat in silence for a while, the wind howling outside our flimsy shelter, both of us lost in thoughts of what might have been. Tell me about your life, she said finally. Are you happy? Despite everything, I found myself smiling. I am. My job is good, challenging but rewarding. Jason and I moved in together last year. He's kind, Mom. Really kind. You'd like him if you... I trailed off, realizing what I was saying. If I was sober enough to see it, she finished for me. I am, you know. Sober. 14 months now. Surprise rendered me momentarily speechless. That's amazing, Mom. What made you stop? Woke up in the hospital after falling down the stairs. Doctor said the next time I might not wake up at all. Something clicked. She shrugged slightly. Too late to fix everything I broke, but I had to try. The weight of lost time settled between us. 14 months of sobriety that I'd known nothing about. A serious diagnosis faced alone. We'd missed so much of each other's lives. Outside, the wind seemed to be dying down slightly. How long had we been in here? Hours, at least. My watch had stopped working in the cold. We need to figure out a plan, I said. When the storm breaks, we need to be ready to find help. But as I spoke, I realized my mother had gone limp against me. Her breathing was shallow, her skin still frighteningly cold despite our shared warmth. Mom? Mom, wake up. I patted her cheek gently, then more firmly. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Diane, you need to stay awake. Panic surged through me. We needed help now, not when the storm decided to break. I couldn't lose her, not now, not when we'd just found each other again. With newfound determination, I tucked the tarp and blanket securely around her and moved to the door of the shed. The blizzard had abated slightly, enough that I could make out the road about 50 yards away. If a vehicle passed, I might be able to flag it down. But that was a big if. And my mother didn't have time for maybes. I returned to her side, checking her pulse, weak but present. Making a decision, I gathered her in my arms. She was alarmingly light, another reminder of how much had changed. "I'm going to get us help," I said, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "Just hold on." I pushed open the shed door, bracing against the renewed assault of cold air. With my mother cradled against me, I began the grueling trek toward the road, each step a battle against the snow and my own exhaustion. The 200-mile journey that had started in Chicago had come down to these 50 yards, the most important distance I'd ever traveled. Every step through the deep snow felt like wading through concrete. My muscles screamed in protest as I carried my mother's limp form, her head lolling against my shoulder. The world had narrowed to this singular focus: reach the road, find help, save her. "Stay with me," I panted, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to her or myself. Just a little farther. Halfway to the road, I heard it, the rumble of an engine cutting through the howl of the wind. A vehicle was approaching. Summoning strength I didn't know I had, I pushed forward faster, desperate to reach the roadside before it passed. "Help!" I screamed as headlights cut through the swirling snow. "Please stop." The truck, an old Ford pickup with a snowplow attached to the front, slowed and then stopped. A man in his 60s jumped out, his eyes widening at the sight of us. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, rushing forward. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "My mother," I gasped, my legs finally buckling. "She's hypothermic. Please help us." The man, who introduced himself as Earl Jensen, owner of the gas station, helped me get my mother into the cab of his truck. The heat blasting from the vents felt like salvation. "Been trying to get to my station since yesterday," Earl explained as he cranked the heat higher. "Road's finally clear enough. Lucky I found you. Nobody comes out this way in storms." My mother remained unconscious, her breathing shallow. I rubbed her hands and face, trying to warm her gradually as I'd learned in a first aid course years ago. "We need to get her to a hospital," I said, fear tightening my throat as she showed no signs of waking. Earl nodded grimly. "Nearest one's in Millridge, about 7 miles. But roads are still bad. Might take us a while." He wasn't exaggerating. The journey back to town was agonizingly slow, the truck occasionally sliding on hidden ice beneath the snow. I kept my arms around my mother, monitoring her pulse and breathing, talking to her continuously, though she couldn't respond. "Remember how you used to make those paper fortune tellers when I was little?" I said, desperate to maintain a connection. "You'd write silly fortunes inside like, 'You will eat ice cream for breakfast,' or 'Your room will clean itself today.' I kept one in my desk drawer all through elementary school." As I spoke, memories flooded back. Not just the bad times, but moments of joy and connection I'd pushed aside in my anger. The Halloween she'd stayed up all night sewing my astronaut costume. The time she'd driven 4 hours to bring me my forgotten retainer at summer camp. The way she'd taught me to stand up for myself when a teacher had been unfair. She had been a good mother once, before addiction and mental health issues had taken her away piece by piece. And now, just as I'd found her again, I might lose her forever. "Hold on," I whispered against her hair, now damp from melting snow. "Please hold on." By the time we reached Millridge Community Hospital, night had fallen again. Earl helped me carry my mother through the emergency entrance, where nurses immediately recognized the severity of her condition. "Severe hypothermia," I heard one say as they transferred her to a gurney. "Core temperature dangerously low." They whisked her away, leaving me standing in the bright fluorescent lights of the waiting room, suddenly aware of my own exhaustion and cold. Earl awkwardly patted my shoulder. "You need looking after too," he said kindly. "Let me find someone." A nurse eventually led me to an exam room, where a doctor checked me for frostbite and hypothermia. I was lucky, she said, my multiple layers had protected me from the worst effects. Still, they wanted to observe me for a few hours, especially given my extreme fatigue. "What about my mother?" I asked. "Diane Thompson?" "The trauma team is with her now," the doctor replied, her expression carefully neutral. "They're doing everything they can." The professional detachment in her voice terrified me more than any explicit warning could have. I knew that tone. It was the same one doctors had used when telling me my grandfather might not make it through the night when I was 12. "Please," I said, gripping the doctor's arm. "She's all I have." Something in my voice must have reached her because her expression softened. "I'll check on her status for you. Try to rest meanwhile." Rest was impossible. As soon as the doctor left, I found my way to a phone and called Jason, who answered on the first ring. "Haley? Is that you? Where are you?" The sound of his voice, familiar, concerned, safe, broke through my remaining composure. I sobbed as I explained everything, finding my mother, the shed, her diagnosis, her current condition. "I'm coming," he said immediately. "Roads are clearing. I'll be there by morning." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "You're not alone in this, Haley. Neither of you are." After hanging up, I made my way to the ICU waiting area, refusing to be confined to my exam room. A nurse took pity on me and brought me scrubs to change into, along with a sandwich and coffee. "Your mother is stable but critical," she told me. "The doctor will be out to speak with you soon." The waiting room clock ticked loudly, marking minutes that felt like hours. I dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair, jerking awake at every sound, expecting news. When the doctor finally appeared, her face was grave. "Miss Thompson? I'm Dr. Winters. Your mother is suffering from severe hypothermia complicated by early stages of malnutrition and dehydration. We've managed to raise her core temperature, but she hasn't regained consciousness yet." "Is she going to?" I couldn't finish the question. "The next 24 hours will be critical," Dr. Winters said. "But she's fighting. And the fact that you found her when you did gives her a much better chance." "She has early-onset dementia," I said, remembering what my mother had told me in the shed. She mentioned doctors had diagnosed her recently. Dr. Winters nodded. "We found medication for Alzheimer's among her personal effects. Once she's stable, we'll consult with neurology. For now, our priority is getting her through this acute crisis." "Can I see her?" "Briefly. She's in and out of consciousness, so don't expect much response." She led me to a small room filled with beeping monitors and the hiss of oxygen. My mother lay in the center of it all, looking impossibly small and frail. Tubes and wires connected her to machines tracking her vital signs. Her face, now free of snow and dirt, showed new lines I didn't recognize, her cheeks hollow from weight loss. I approached cautiously, taking her hand. It felt warmer now, though still cooler than it should be. "Hey, Mom," I said softly. "It's Haley." "I'm here." Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. The steady beep of the heart monitor provided the only response. "You're going to be okay," I continued, trying to convince us both. "We both are." I stayed until a nurse gently told me I needed to let my mother rest. Back in the waiting room, exhaustion finally claimed me, and I fell into a deep sleep curled uncomfortably across two chairs. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the windows and Jason's hand on my shoulder. I blinked up at him, momentarily disoriented. "You came," I said, throwing my arms around him. "Of course I came." He held me tightly. "How is she?" "Still unconscious." "They're worried about." I swallowed hard. "About brain damage from the hypothermia. And there's the dementia diagnosis too. I don't know what happens next." Jason sat beside me, keeping one arm around my shoulders. "One step at a time. First, she needs to wake up. Then we'll figure out the rest." "We?" I looked at him, surprised. "Yes, we." He met my gaze steadily. "She's your mother, Haley. She's part of your life, which makes her part of mine too." Fresh tears welled in my eyes, but before I could respond, Dr. Winters appeared. "Miss Thompson? Your mother is awake and asking for you." I nearly knocked over a chair in my haste to follow her. Jason squeezed my hand before letting me go alone. My mother was sitting up slightly, still connected to various monitors, but looking more present than she had in the shed. Her eyes found mine as I entered, and she gave a weak smile. "Haley girl," she said, her voice hoarse. "You found me." "I found you," I confirmed, moving to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted. "The doctor says you saved my life." I shook my head. "Earl Jensen saved both our lives. But you came looking for me. After everything, you still came." The simple statement hung between us, laden with all our complicated history. "Of course I came," I said finally. "You're my mother." She closed her eyes briefly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't deserve you." "Mom, no, please. Let me say this while I'm clear-headed." She opened her eyes, fixing me with a gaze more lucid than I'd seen in years. "I failed you, Haley. So many times. The drinking, the neglect, the emotional manipulation. None of that was your fault. All of it was my failure." I sat carefully on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. "Why didn't you tell me about the diagnosis?" She looked away. "Pride. Shame. Fear that you'd feel obligated to help out of duty, not love. I wanted to get better first, prove I could be the mother you deserved." "And the apartment?" "Getting evicted. Started forgetting to pay bills. Then forgot I'd forgotten." She attempted a small laugh that turned into a cough. "The dementia made it hard to keep track, and my savings were already thin from years of, well, poor choices." "Where have you been staying?" "Friend's couch mostly. Susan from my support group. She's been sober 5 years, took me under her wing." Mom paused, gathering strength. "But I kept having episodes. Getting confused, wandering at night. It wasn't fair to her. So you decided to find me." She nodded slowly. "Wanted to explain in person. Apologize properly. But I got confused on the highway. Turned north instead of south. By the time I realized, the storm was starting. Then the car ran out of gas. I thought of her, disoriented and alone as the blizzard closed in. The image broke my heart. "I'm so sorry you went through that alone," I said. "But Mom, why didn't you call sooner?" "I would have helped." "Would you have?" she asked, her gaze direct. "After everything I put you through?" The question hung between us, uncomfortable but necessary. Would I have answered her call 3 months ago? 6 months ago? Before the diagnosis? Before her sobriety? "I don't know," I admitted finally. "But I'm here now. And we're going to figure this out together." She squeezed my hand weakly. "The doctors say I can't live independently anymore. The dementia will get worse. I don't want to be a burden to you, Haley. You've worked so hard for your life." "You're not a burden," I said firmly. "You're my mother. And yes, we have a lot of history to work through, a lot of pain to process. But we'll face that together too." For the first time since finding her at the gas station, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was the same look she used to give me when I was little and scared of thunderstorms, a look that said, "We'll get through this." The moment was interrupted by a nurse coming to check vitals, but something had shifted between us. A beginning, not an ending. A chance, against all odds, to rewrite our story. As I stepped out to let the medical team work, I found Jason waiting patiently in the hallway. "She's awake," I told him, my voice steadier than it had been in days. "And we have a lot to figure out." He nodded, taking my hand. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Standing in that sterile hospital hallway, exhausted and emotionally raw, I realized something profound. The 200-mile journey through the snowstorm had been just the beginning. The real journey, reconciliation, forgiveness, creating a new relationship with my mother, was just starting. But for the first time in years, I wasn't facing it alone. The hospital kept my mother for a week, treating not just the hypothermia, but also dehydration, malnutrition, and a thorough evaluation of her cognitive state. I stayed in Millridge, finding a room at the inn where I'd spent that first night in the lobby. Jason returned to Chicago reluctantly, needing to get back to work, but called multiple times daily. Dr. Winters introduced us to Dr. Liam Chin, a neurologist who specialized in early-onset dementia. He conducted a battery of tests and sat down with us on the 4th day to discuss the results. Your mother has early-stage Alzheimer's disease, he confirmed, his voice gentle but direct. The good news is we've caught it relatively early, and there are medications that can help slow the progression. My mother nodded, her face remarkably calm. She'd had months to adjust to this reality, I realized, while I was still processing the shock. What does this mean for her day-to-day life? I asked. For now, she can manage many activities independently, but she shouldn't live alone, Dr. Chen explained. The episodes of confusion will increase in frequency and severity. She'll need supervision, especially with medications and potentially hazardous activities. Like driving, my mother said quietly. Yes, Dr. Chen agreed. I'm afraid your driving days are over, Mrs. Thompson. Ms., she corrected automatically, then gave a small, sad smile. Though I suppose titles won't matter much soon anyway. Mom, don't talk like that, I said, reaching for her hand. This isn't a death sentence. No, but it is a sentence, she replied, with a clarity that broke my heart. I've had time to think about it, Haley. I know what's coming. Dr. Chen leaned forward. There have been significant advances in treatment in recent years. While we can't stop the progression entirely, we can slow it down considerably. Many patients maintain good quality of life for years with proper support. What kind of support are we talking about? I asked. Ideally, a structured living environment with some assistance available. This could be a memory care facility, assisted living, or a home setting with consistent caregivers. The options swirled in my mind, each with profound implications. A facility would provide professional care but felt so impersonal. Bringing her to Chicago would disrupt the life I'd built. Staying in Millridge wasn't practical for my career. I need to make some calls, I said finally. Research our options. Over the next few days, I dove into research mode, the same focused determination I applied to marketing campaigns now directed at finding solutions for my mother. I called assisted living facilities in Chicago, researched memory care units, and spoke with social workers about government assistance programs. The costs were staggering. Even with Medicare, the out-of-pocket expenses for quality care would quickly deplete my mother's meager savings and strain my own finances. But the alternative, inadequate care, was unthinkable. During my research, I connected with Susan, the friend my mother had been staying with. She provided valuable insights into my mother's daily struggles and surprising strengths. Your mom was religious about her AA meetings, Susan told me over the phone. Never missed one, even on days when she was confused about other things. And she volunteered at the community garden twice a week. Working with plants seemed to center her. These glimpses into my mother's recent life, her determination to maintain sobriety, her attempt to contribute to her community, painted a picture of a woman trying desperately to rebuild herself. A woman I hadn't given a chance to know. On her last day in the hospital, I sat beside my mother's bed while we waited for discharge papers. She looked better, some color had returned to her cheeks, and she'd gained a couple of pounds from regular meals. I've been thinking about what happens next, I began carefully. She nodded. Me too. I've already looked into some state-funded facilities. I want you to come to Chicago, I interrupted. To live with me and Jason. Surprise flickered across her face. Haley, no. Your life is just getting started. I won't be your burden. You're not a burden, I insisted. You're my mother. And I've missed too much already. It's not that simple. This disease, it's going to get ugly. Confusion, mood swings, eventually not recognizing you. You didn't sign up for that. Neither did you, I pointed out. But here we are. She studied my face, searching for doubt or reluctance. Have you talked to Jason about this? It's his home too. I have, I admitted. He's supportive. We have a spare bedroom that gets good natural light. It's not huge, but, Haley. She placed her hand over mine. I appreciate what you're offering. More than you know. But I need you to think about this carefully. Not just the logistics, but emotionally. Our relationship has been complicated. Are you sure you're ready to be my caregiver? The question gave me pause. Was I romanticizing the situation? Letting guilt drive my decisions? I thought about the 3 years of silence between us, the childhood wounds still healing, the trust still being rebuilt. I don't have all the answers, I said honestly. And yes, There's probably some guilt motivating me. But there's love too, Mom. Despite everything, that never went away. Tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve this chance. Maybe not, I acknowledged. But you're getting it anyway. We both are. The drive back to Chicago 2 days later was vastly different from my journey north. The roads were clear, the sun bright on the remaining snow. My mother sat beside me in the passenger seat, gazing out at the landscape in quiet contemplation. I haven't been to Chicago in years, she said as the skyline appeared on the horizon. Not since your college graduation. I glanced at her surprised. You came to my graduation? I didn't see you. She smiled sadly. I sat in the back. Was having a bad day, didn't trust myself to stay sober around your friends and their champagne celebrations. But I wanted to see you walk across that stage. The revelation stunned me. All this time, I'd believed she hadn't cared enough to come. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Would it have mattered then? You were so angry, so determined to build a life without me. And you had every right to be. I didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't wrong. I had been angry, determined to prove I could thrive without her chaos. But knowing she'd been there, watching from a distance, shifted something in my understanding of our past. Jason was waiting at our apartment when we arrived, having prepared the spare room with fresh linens and a small vase of daisies, my mother's favorite flowers, a detail I'd mentioned in passing. It's not much, I said as I showed her the room, suddenly aware of how small it was compared to her old apartment. But we can decorate it however you like. She walked slowly around the space, touching the bookshelf, looking out the window at the view of neighboring buildings and a slice of lake beyond. It's perfect, she said, voice thick with emotion. Thank you both. The first few weeks were an adjustment period for everyone. Jason and I both worked full-time, so we arranged for a home health aide to stay with my mother during the day. Evenings and weekends became a new routine of shared meals, careful conversations, and slowly rebuilding trust. There were challenges, of course. My mother had good days and bad days. On good days, she was lucid, helpful around the apartment, full of stories and questions about my life. On bad days, she became confused about where she was, sometimes reverting to snippets of arguments we'd had years ago, as if time had folded in on itself. I learned to be patient, to redirect rather than correct, to find the person behind the disease even when she was struggling to find herself. Jason proved remarkably adaptable, developing his own rapport with my mother that sometimes surprised me with its ease. A month after she moved in, I came home to find them laughing together in the kitchen, making the spaghetti sauce recipe my grandmother had passed down. Mom taught me the secret ingredient, Jason said, grinning as he stirred the pot. Family recipes should stay in the family, my mother replied, winking at me. The casual inclusion of Jason in family wasn't lost on me. Nor was the fact that she'd remembered the recipe perfectly, despite forgetting where she'd put her glasses 3 times that morning. It was these contradictions that characterized life with early Alzheimer's, the strange preservation of distant memories alongside the loss of recent ones, moments of perfect clarity followed by confusing gaps. We established routines that helped. Morning walks along the lakefront when weather permitted. Weekly visits to an art therapy group specifically for dementia patients. Sunday dinners where my mother insisted on cooking, with one of us always nearby to monitor the stove. 2 months in, she had a severe episode of confusion that required hospitalization. Sitting beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep after being sedated, I felt the full weight of what we had undertaken. You okay? Jason asked, bringing me a cup of terrible hospital coffee. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I was prepared for this, but seeing her not recognize me today, it was like losing her all over again. He sat beside me, our shoulders touching. You know, my grandfather had Alzheimer's. By the end, he didn't know any of us. But my mom said something I never forgot. She said, even when he doesn't know who I am, I still know who he is. The simple wisdom of that statement resonated deeply. Even as parts of my mother slipped away, my knowledge of her, both the good and difficult parts, remained intact. My love for her didn't depend on her ability to reciprocate in conventional ways. When she was released the next day, something had shifted in my approach. I stopped looking for the mother I remembered and started appreciating the person in front of me. A woman fighting a devastating disease with dignity, a woman who, despite her cognitive decline, still found ways to express love. She began leaving me small notes around the apartment, reminders to herself that transformed into unexpected gifts for me. Haley likes almond milk in her coffee, read one sticky note on the refrigerator. Thank Haley for the blue sweater, said another by her bedside. Tell Haley about the dream with the beach, was stuck to the bathroom mirror. Some days she forgot she'd written them. Some days she forgot who Haley was. But the notes continued, breadcrumbs of her consciousness, her determined effort to hold on to connections even as they began to slip through her fingers. 6 months after the snowstorm, we established a new tradition. Every Sunday, weather permitting, I would drive my mother to a nearby botanical garden. Something about the predictable patterns of nature, the cyclical reliability of plants, seemed to ground her. I used to garden, you know, she told me one Sunday as we sat on a bench surrounded by late summer blooms. I know, Mom. You had that vegetable patch behind our apartment in Milwaukee. She looked surprised. You remember that? You were so little. I remember the tomatoes. How proud you were when I ate them straight off the vine. Her smile held a flash of her younger self, the mother who had taught me to appreciate small wonders. I wasn't always a disaster, was I? She asked, a rare moment of meta-awareness about her past. No, I said, taking her hand. You weren't. And you're not now either. Later that afternoon, I took a detour on our drive home. Without explanation, I navigated to a familiar neighborhood and parked in front of an unassuming brick building, our old apartment from my high school years. Do you recognize this place? I asked. She stared through the windshield, her expression clouding, then clearing. We lived here, she said. You had the bedroom with the fire escape outside the window. You used to sit out there and read when you thought I didn't know. I laughed, surprised she'd been aware of my teenage hideaway. You knew about that? I knew everything you did, Haley. Even when I was not myself. Part of me was always watching, always worrying. The admission was startling. I'd always assumed her addiction had rendered her completely oblivious to my life. I'm sorry I couldn't be better then, she continued. The drinking, it wasn't because of you. It was because I couldn't face myself. I know that now, I said. And I'm sorry too, for cutting you out of my life instead of trying harder to help. She squeezed my hand. You did what you needed to survive. I never blamed you for that. On the drive home, I realized we had finally found a way to acknowledge our past without being imprisoned by it. Not through dramatic confrontations or tearful confessions, but through these quiet moments of honest reflection. The journey ahead would not be easy. Dr. Chin had been clear about the progressive nature of Alzheimer's. There would be more difficult days, more hospital visits, more moments when the mother I knew would seem unreachable. But as we drove through Chicago streets, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected to find. We couldn't change our complicated past. We couldn't stop the advance of her disease. But we could choose how to face each day we had left together. My mother hummed softly beside me, an old lullaby she used to sing when I was small. Her memory of the melody remained perfect, even as other memories faded. I joined in, our voices blending as we made our way home, not to the home of my childhood, with its uncertainty and pain, but to the new home we were creating together, day by day. A home built on forgiveness, acceptance, and the profound understanding that love exists even in the broken places. 6 months later, the rhythm of our lives had settled into a new normal. Mom moved from our spare bedroom to a one-bedroom apartment in a nearby assisted living facility that specialized in memory care. It wasn't an easy decision, but after she'd wandered out of our apartment at 3 in the morning, confused and looking for her childhood home in Wisconsin, we knew she needed more supervision than we could provide. The facility, Lakeside Gardens, wasn't what I'd initially feared. Her apartment was bright and spacious, with large windows overlooking a courtyard garden. She decorated it with photos, artwork, and a few cherished possessions from her previous life. Most importantly, it was only a 15-minute walk from our apartment, allowing for daily visits. "I like it here," she told me one Sunday afternoon as we sat in the communal sunroom. "The nurses don't treat me like I'm stupid when I forget things." It was true. The staff approached their residents with remarkable dignity and patience. They knew my mother as Diane the garden volunteer, or Diane who makes the best coffee, not just Diane with Alzheimer's. She had good days and bad days, but the medication Dr. Chen prescribed helped stabilize her condition somewhat. The structured environment and regular routines seemed to reduce her confusion episodes, though they still occurred. I visited every evening after work and took her out every weekend. Jason often joined us for Sunday brunch at a cafe that had become our regular spot, where the staff knew my mother's preference for blueberry pancakes and always brought them without her having to order. My relationship with Jason deepened through this shared experience. Watching him interact with my mother, patiently answering the same question multiple times, gently redirecting her when she became confused, treating her with unfailing respect, revealed a depth of compassion I hadn't fully appreciated before. "I've been thinking," he said one night as we walked home from Lakeside. "Maybe we should look at houses outside the city. Something with a garden for your mom to visit. More space." The suggestion caught me off guard. "You want to move?" "Because of Mom." "Not just because of her," he said carefully. "But yes, partly. I see how much those garden visits mean to both of you. And I've been thinking about our future anyway. Kids someday, maybe." The casual mention of our future together, a future that included my mother as a given, moved me deeply. This wasn't the life either of us had envisioned when we first started dating, yet here he was, not just accepting our new reality but actively embracing it. Work provided another unexpected source of healing. My boss, Meredith, had been surprisingly supportive when I explained my mother's condition, offering flexible hours and occasional work-from-home days. More significantly, she approached me with a proposal. "We're pitching for the Alzheimer's Association account," she explained during our weekly meeting. "Given your personal experience, would you be interested in leading the team?" The opportunity to channel my complicated emotions into meaningful work felt like a gift. I threw myself into researching their previous campaigns, understanding their mission, and developing a strategy that spoke to families like mine. Those navigating the painful, bewildering journey of loving someone with dementia. Our pitch won the account. The campaign we created focused not on the tragedy of the disease, but on the moments of connection that remained possible, the handwritten notes, the remembered songs, the shared gardens. It was honest about the difficulties, but refused to define people solely by their diagnosis. "Your mother would be proud," Megan told me after seeing the finalized campaign materials. "She is proud," I corrected. "She may not understand the details anymore, but she knows it's important to me." Indeed, while my mother's grasp of my day-to-day work had faded, she retained an emotional understanding of significant events. When I showed her the published advertisements, she studied them carefully. "These will help people," she said with certainty. "People like us." Her use of us, acknowledging herself as someone with Alzheimer's while simultaneously identifying as part of the solution, struck me as profoundly brave. One drizzly April morning, almost exactly a year after the snowstorm, I fulfilled a promise I'd made to myself. I drove back to Millridge, back to Jensen's gas station where I'd found my mother. The station looked different in spring, an unremarkable building beside a rural highway, nothing like the snow-shrouded outpost of my memory. Earl Jensen was there, cleaning the windows of the convenience store section. "Well, I'll be," he said when he recognized me. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I wanted to thank you properly," I explained. "For that night, for helping us." He waved away my thanks. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." We talked for a while. I told him about my mother's diagnosis, her move to assisted living, the small victories and ongoing challenges. He listened with genuine interest, occasionally sharing stories of his own mother's final years with a different form of dementia. "How do you do it?" he asked eventually. "Keep showing up when you know what's coming?" The question was asked without judgment, with the simple curiosity of someone who'd faced similar choices. I spent 3 years not showing up, I said after a moment. And all it did was leave us both alone with our pain. This way is harder in some ways, but better in the ways that matter. Before leaving, I took a photo of the maintenance shed where we'd sheltered during the storm. It wasn't much to look at, just a weathered wooden structure behind the main building, but it had been the setting for one of the most important conversations of my life. When I showed the photo to my mother later, she didn't remember the shed specifically, but she recognized something about it. "We were cold," she said, tracing the image with her finger. "But you kept me warm." "That's right, Mom." "And you took me home with you." "Yes, I did." She looked up at me, her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "Thank you for finding me, Haley girl." The simple gratitude in her voice encompassed far more than that night in the snowstorm. It acknowledged all the ways we had found each other over the past year. Across the gulf of estrangement, across the fog of her disease, across the complicated landscape of our shared history. Our Sunday tradition evolved as the weather warmed. Instead of the botanical gardens, we would drive to a small lakeside park where my mother could dip her feet in the water and feel the sun on her face. Sometimes we'd bring a picnic. Sometimes Jason would join us. Sometimes we'd meet with other families from the support group I'd joined for children of parents with early-onset dementia. On one such Sunday, as I helped my mother walk along the shore, she stopped suddenly, looking out at the horizon where lake met sky. "I used to bring you to a lake like this," she said. "When you were little." "Lake Mendota," I nodded. "In Madison. We'd feed the ducks." She smiled. "You remember so much." "I'm remembering for both of us now," I said gently. Something in her expression shifted, a moment of complete lucidity breaking through the fog. "I'm still here, you know," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Even when I forget things. Even when I don't know where I am. Some part of me is still here, watching, feeling." The profound awareness took my breath away. These moments of clarity were becoming rarer, making them all the more precious. "I know, Mom. I see you." We stood there together, the gentle waves lapping at our feet, two women forever connected by blood and history, love and pain. The journey ahead would continue to be difficult. There would be more decline, more challenges, more days when she wouldn't recognize me or herself. But something fundamental had changed in how I faced that future. I no longer saw it as a burden or an obligation, but as a privilege. The privilege of being present, of bearing witness to my mother's life in all its complexity. As spring turned to summer, our extended family began to reconnect. My father, hearing about my mother's condition through mutual acquaintances, called for the first time in years. "How is she?" he asked awkwardly. "She has good days and bad days," I replied, surprised by his interest. "Today was a good day." She remembered all the words to American Pie. He chuckled. "She always loved that song. Used to sing it in the car on road trips." The memory, shared across time and distance, reminded me that I wasn't the only one who carried pieces of my mother's story. By reaching out to relatives, old family friends, and even my father, I began collecting these fragments, creating a mosaic of memories that could never be erased by disease. One particularly meaningful Sunday, I drove my mother past the gas station where I'd found her freezing in the storm. The summer rain fell gently, so different from the blizzard that had nearly taken her life. "Rain reminds me of something," she said, watching droplets race down the car window. "Something important." "The night I found you?" I suggested gently. She shook her head, frustrated by the gap in her memory. "No, something good. Something with you." I waited patiently, letting her find the thread of the memory at her own pace. "Your first day of kindergarten," she said suddenly. "It rained. You were so nervous. I walked you to class, and when I turned to leave, you grabbed my hand and said, 'What if you forget to pick me up?'" I stared at her, astonished. I had no recollection of this moment. "I knelt down," she continued, lost in the memory, and said, "Haley girl, I could forget my own name, but I would never, ever forget to come back for you." Tears filled my eyes at the unintentional prophecy in her words. She had indeed begun to forget her own name on her worst days, yet some essential part of her had never forgotten me. I kept that promise, didn't I? She asked, suddenly uncertain. Yes, Mom, I assured her, taking her hand. You always came back for me. And now it's my turn to do the same for you. That evening, as I helped her settle back into her apartment at Lakeside Gardens, she grew pensive. I've been thinking about what happens. Later, she said, arranging her medication on the nightstand. When I can't make decisions anymore. I sat beside her on the bed, hearing the fear beneath her words. We have good doctors, Mom. And I'll always make sure you're taken care of. I know that. But I want to tell you something important while I still can. She took my hands in hers. When the time comes when I'm not me anymore, don't put your life on hold. Don't stop living because I am. Mom, no, listen. Her grip tightened. I wasted too many years. Hiding in bottles, running from pain. Don't make my mistakes. Promise me you'll keep building your life, even when I can't be part of it anymore. The request broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Even facing cognitive decline, she was still trying to mother me, to protect me from pain. I promise, I said finally. But that day isn't here yet. And until it comes, we make the most of the time we have. She nodded, satisfied. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? As summer turned to fall, I noticed subtle changes in our dynamic. Increasingly, I was the keeper of our shared history, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, the one who knew which foods she liked and which made her ill. I found myself telling her stories of her own life, her favorite books, the year she won a community service award, the camping trips we took when money was tight but spirits were high. Sometimes she'd remember along with me. Sometimes she'd listen with the delight of someone hearing a good story for the first time. Jason and I moved forward with our plans to find a house with a garden. We found a modest 3-bedroom with a sunroom and a backyard full of perennials just outside the city limits, close enough to Lakeside Gardens that I could visit daily. For when your mom visits, Jason said as he showed me the sunroom. She can see the garden from here, even in winter. My mother helped us move in, insisting on unpacking kitchen boxes even though she placed items in occasionally creative locations. The activity gave her purpose, and her joy in our milestone was genuine. That evening, sitting in our new living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Jason knelt beside my chair and opened a small velvet box. I was going to plan something elaborate, he admitted. But then I realized. This moment, right now, with the 3 of us starting this new chapter together, this is perfect. Through happy tears, I accepted his proposal, then immediately went to share the news with my mother, who was arranging flowers in the sunroom. Jason asked me to marry him, I told her, showing her the ring. And I said yes. She studied the ring, then my face. For a terrifying moment, I thought she didn't understand. Then she smiled the full, radiant smile of her younger self. My Haley's getting married, she said, pulling me into a hug. I always knew you'd find someone worthy of you. The fact that she remembered Jason, recognized the significance of the moment, and expressed such joy felt like a gift beyond measure. Later that night, after my mother had returned to Lakeside, Jason and I sat on the porch of our new home, planning our future. I want her at the wedding, I said. Even if she doesn't understand what's happening, Jason finished for me. Of course. She's family. Family. The word had such different associations now than it had a year ago. Once a source of pain and complication, it had become a source of strength, not because our problems had magically disappeared, but because we learned to face them together. The journey that had begun with a frantic drive through a snowstorm had transformed into something I never expected. A second chance to know my mother, to forgive her, to love her as she was rather than as I wished she had been. And perhaps most importantly, a chance to let her know me as an adult, to see the woman I'd become partly because of her, partly in spite of her, but always connected to her in ways neither time nor disease could sever. Every Sunday, weather permitting, I still drive my mother to our special places. The botanical garden, the lakeside park, sometimes just for ice cream at her favorite shop. On our drives, we listen to the music she loves, talk about memories both of us can access, and simply enjoy being together in the moment. These Sunday drives have become sacred to me, a ritual of connection that transcends the ravages of her disease. Whether she recognizes me or not, whether she remembers where we're going or why, the simple act of being together creates its own meaning. This Sunday, as golden autumn light filters through multicolored leaves, I help my mother into the passenger seat of my car. She settles in with a contented sigh, watching the world through her window. "Where are we going today, Haley girl?" she asks, using the nickname that has survived when other memories have faded. "Wherever you want, Mom," I reply, starting the engine. "We have all day." She smiles, reaching over to pat my hand on the gear shift. "Just drive," she says. "I like being with you." And so I drive, treasuring these moments while they last, storing memories for both of us, finding beauty in a journey I never expected to take. If you're watching this and struggling with a difficult family relationship or caring for a loved one with dementia, please know you're not alone. The road isn't easy, but there can be profound connection even in the hardest circumstances. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you ever reconnected with an estranged family member? Or found unexpected healing in a challenging situation? Please like and subscribe if this story touched you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that reconciliation is possible, even when it seems impossible. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, sometimes the longest and most important drives we take aren't measured in miles, but in the courage it takes to find our way back to each other.